When I was in high school, I was making fan art for NBA players.
I love it. Who are your guys?
Like Jason Richardson, LeBron James, Michael Jordan.
Nice.
Like,
amazing.
Yeah, I would make wallpapers. I'd make websites. It was my first like foray into design.
Yeah.
Internet forums, internet communities. I got connected to other creatives that were also interested in this. There was a website called West Coast Remix that would wallpapers you could download. And so I didn't at the time realize that was a career path. I was like, oh, this is just like a fun hobby. And it wasn't until my oldest sister, Katia, asked me had I considered going to art school that I realized this was a path that I could.
When did this happen?
I was in...
Were you in high school?
Yeah, maybe junior year of high school.
Okay.
She had a friend who was a type designer.
Okay.
And he had gone to art school, I think RISD. And that just set me down a whole path like, oh wow, I can make a career out of this. And when I looked at the average income of a graphic designer, I could expect to make as much as $35,000 a year when I graduated. Like, this was not...
That was gold back then.
That was gold, yeah. I was like, wow. So it wasn't it was purely from a place of just passion and this is what I love to do, and not at all from a place of this is going to be a lucrative path for me. But once I got into art school and that environment allowed me to really go full time into exploring that, that's when it, I think, turned into sort of a career and something that it is today for me. So
and so let's snap to the here and now. One of the things you said recently that I absolutely love was, you started off working on visual electric for creatives, and you found over time by honing in who you were serving, you started to focus the energy of the company and generate momentum that way. Talk me through the genesis of Visual Electric. Like, why did you start this company and not 100 other companies? And what has that process been like honing in on a particular user?
I've always wanted to be a founder. Like, this has been a dream of mine for many years. I've had many terrible startup ideas that I'm really glad I didn't
I think we talked about a couple of them, right?
I think for me, it was always about finding the right problem. And I have a folder of Dropbox paper docs that were my startup ideas, and I would come up with these, any level of fidelity from like a quick, jot of an idea to like a pitch deck with prototypes. Like, they all sort of landed on somewhere on the spectrum of fidelity. But I met this investor named Greg Rosen, who is a pre-seed investor at Box Group. And he became my first filter for startup ideas. What Greg told me later was he was looking for is a great founder has a good slope of curve. And that's what he was looking for. So we would have regular meetings. He would see how much progress I made over the course of a week, 2 weeks, whatever. The idea wasn't what he was interested in. He was interested in seeing my progress.
Interesting. Okay.
And at some point he observed, this guy seems to be very driven to figure this out. Now I just need to direct him towards the right problem. Luckily, I didn't pursue any of these other ideas. I was patient, I waited, and when I was working at Universe, I noticed that some of the designers on my team were using AI in their work. And that was the first clue to me that, oh, there's something here. This is providing real value, despite the tools being primitive. And I was using it as a art director, creative director. I was also using it that way. I was like, okay, what about this? Have you tried this idea? And then I was talking to my friend George at Humane, GK3, and Humane was early into AI. They were using all of the tools from GPT to Midjourney to Dolly, everything. And he commented to me that the tools were so primitive. They were not for him as a designer. And so it felt to me like there was an opportunity to build a new kind of creative tool around this technology. And then the next question I asked was, so when there's a disruptive technology, where does the value accrue? Is it going to the incumbents or is it going to the startups? And my conclusion was that if the technology is disruptive, I think there's an opportunity for a startup to build, to capture the value. And what makes a technology disruptive in the creative tool space? I think it's when the workflow changes. And with AI, the workflow is being rewritten. It's completely different. And so we're at this moment of market expansion as well as disruption. And it felt like there was an opportunity that I was uniquely positioned to solve or to work on. And that was specifically about how does AI disrupt the way that creative work is done in the brand and marketing space.
Right.
And I ended up doing a broad survey of creative tools, and I thought about everything from music to 3D to motion. And the reason I landed on branded marketing is that, one, it's an area of interest and passion of mine, and two, if you look at what branding content is, it's basically images, videos, and text.
Yes.
And so those are the three types of content that exist in the largest volume on the internet, and therefore we have the most development in the models that are being trained. It seemed like they were they would be the first to reach a quality level that could be used by professionals in production. Right. So there was a combination of market fit, technology fit, and personal interest and expertise that aligned there. It felt like there wasn't a clear company already formed at that moment that was going after this. And so that was the conditions that sort of led me to making the leap.
Amazing.
Designers, and I'm going to make a generalization here, but I think they tend to be poor at problem selection. And what I mean by that is designers, I think as a type of person, care more about certain types of things than the average person does. For example, designers care a lot about interface design. And Rdio and Spotify is a really good example. Like, I think there's a lot of designers who are really sad that Rdio didn't win the music wars. And not to say like Rdio was a bad problem with poor problem selection, but I think I'll say that when I worked at Aspen, we were basically a design product studio. We didn't have a strong bent towards picking business problems that were going to be valuable if we solved them. We were picking problems that were interesting to designer people to solve. And the overlap between what is a good business and what designers care about is unfortunately can be small. And so if you think about what Apple has done a really good job of, I think, is the problems that they have chosen to work on have very little market risk. When they introduced the iPod, it was already an established market. There just wasn't a clear market leader, and there was a opportunity to design something that was just going to be a much better experience.
They weren't manufacturing an activity. People were listening to music on the go.
100%.
The problem was that they were sort of constrained to the amount of music they can bring on the go.
And they were operating in a market where the consumer cared about design. Like, general consumers care about user experience. They will vote with their wallet to buy something that has a better UX than something that doesn't. So they were very good at problem selection, I would say, with that product. And then the risk, once you've selected a good market and you have an opportunity to make a 10x better product, it's execution risk. And that is the kind of risk that I think designers are best suited to take on, because it's where designers spike the highest. So the thing that I've spent a lot of energy thinking about with Visual Electric and the problems I work on is how do I prove to myself that this is a valuable problem to solve? And the best way to do that, I think, is to do what you just said, which is to go to where there's existing behaviors, because human behaviors are slow to change, even if the technology is fast to change. So
it's probably the greatest bottleneck of this whole transition, right?
100%, 100%, And the technology is way out ahead of human behavior. And so graphic design, the need to create graphic design assets is a proven market. There's zero market risk there. And so for us as a design-focused team, we now can, I think, take on the execution risk of how do you build a 10x better product using this new technology. Our success as a company has tracked almost one-to-one with the specificity at which we understand who our customer is. And when we launched the product, our positioning was image generation for creatives, which was a very broad positioning. And I can tell you that everything downstream of that becomes very difficult when you don't know who your customer is.
It's like AI for people.
I think the problem with not knowing who your customer is everything downstream of that becomes very difficult. What features do you build? How do you go to market? What value props do you put on your homepage? How do you know which feedback to listen to? So all these things were just way too ambiguous, and I think the reason we positioned ourselves that way is because we did see that AI is going to be this broadly disruptive technology. And it felt premature to single out one particular segment of the market without more confidence that that was the right part of the market to focus on.
Did it give you surface area to identify where the pull?
It did, but also there was a few, it wasn't a very good, the scientific rigor on this test was not very good because everything that we did from the beginning was really oriented towards graphic designers, whether we realized it or not.
I see. So there was already kind of like a bias, and 100% bias inside there.
The biggest one is the infinite canvas.
Yeah, that's a good point.
That's already...
That's always been there.
It's always been there, and that was already making the product not a consumer product.
Yeah, there are people who see infinite canvases and they're like, that's not for me.
Whether or not we admitted that to ourselves, we had prematurely decided that before we ran that experiment.
Right, interesting.
Okay. The second is everything around the branding, the imagery we chose to feature in this. All of it was probably because of my personal taste was oriented towards the graphic designer persona. Like that, we hired a really great design agency to do our brand named Manual. Manual is
graphic design firm,
pure graphic design. So
and so great at it.
Amazing, like world class. But so we made all these decisions before we were willing to admit to ourselves this is what we were building. We kind of laid the groundwork, and unsurprisingly, the audience that I think responded most to what we had built was the graphic designer. And so it was a bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy, but I think I'll steel me on the case for it now, though, because I think there is a strong strategic argument to be made for graphic designers. I agree that AI has as I was just describing, AI has the ability to displace jobs. And we can get into the sort of morality of that and the ethics of that, but sort of however you feel about it, it's happening.
Correct.
And so the question is, as a founder in the space, how do we skate to where the puck is going, right? How do we make sure we're not building a product for somebody who isn't going to be isn't going to be employed in the future? My prediction is that, as these tools get better, as the technology improves, the types of people that will be able to use design software will expand. In the sense that design tools are going to become easier to use. Prompting is much easier than manipulating layers and all the sort of intricacies of design tools today. And so what is actually the skill set that will be left over? When everyone can make things, what you need then is taste, and you need to tell a story. And who are the best at doing that today? I would say creative directors, art directors, brand designers. Their job is to come up with a narrative, build a world, and pick the art direction, the brand voice, the individual elements, the colors, and put it together into a cohesive, recognizable system, and then to execute on that across a bunch of different marketing channels. And so the definition of what a graphic designer is, I think, is going to change. If you go into like a design agency, studio, the ranking order will be creative director, art director, graphic designer, or brand designer. These are all just steps along the same ladder. And the creative director sits at the top. Their job is to architect the vision. The art director then will essentially manage the team of people who are then implementing that vision. And the graphic designers are doing the actual work of building it out. So wherever you sit along that hierarchy, I think AI kind of gets...
That's your customer, right?
That's our customer. And I think AI gives everybody the opportunity to kind of go one click up the ladder because the tools are getting better. And so you can now, instead of being the intern, I can direct the tool and it's my intern. And instead of being the art director, now I get to be the creative director. So it's everybody kind of gets to increase their output. But I think that customer, that skill set, the thing that's going to last is you need to have great taste and you need to be able to tell a great story. And we want to go to where that person exists today and empower them. Like we see ourselves as the cursor for graphic designers. We're going to the professional. Now, in the same way that you can have vibe code and cursor and types of people who are making software is changing, the same thing is going to happen in design. You're going to bring in a new class of people who wouldn't have been considered creative directors before, or they wouldn't have had the time to kind of come up through the design studio. You don't get to creative director until you've been a designer for 10 years.
Correct.
And you put in your time.
Yeah.
Now you can just try your hand at it on day one. And there's going to be a new class of people who are AI creative directors.
Right. Right out of the gate.
Right out of the gate.
Yeah.
We were basically, we were on life support until August. And then we shipped a new model. And it was like overnight, everything went up into the right. And it was, nothing else changed in the product except the quality of the images that we were able to produce. And so, and then that makes sense. I mean, if you're a professional, one lesson we learned was early on, we were thinking that, okay, even if the images aren't good enough to be used in a production environment, they might be good enough to use in a concepting stage.
Right.
And instead of, as a designer, instead of presenting to the client or to a teammate or whoever, it's like A plus B, where A and B are reference images you found on the internet. And then the client has to imagine C. You can say, I can just show you C directly. And that's sort of what we were imagining would be the use case. The thing that we learned is that designers, it actually wasn't even good enough for that, because
for concepting.
Because designers would rather have beautiful reference imagery than that required the viewer to imagine what it would look like when combining these concepts than having a bad looking image that shows the concept directly.
Wow.
Their job is to inspire. And if it's not inspiring, it's not doing the job. And so
that's fascinating insight.
So as soon as we hit this quality bar, everything started working, and it was working largely for concepting. That was the first use case. And it was also being used for like some production things like marketing channels, social, sort of higher volume, maybe lower quality, where lower quality could be accepted. But
that begs the question, is is that where you find yourself like bumping into, actually what our users are actually doing is like, they're not shipping, they're selling in some respects, right? That is the core job to be done with our tool. Right. And maybe there's a separate set of tools or a separate use case for production level assets. But in the sphere of like concepting, where you're creating alignment and you're selling a vision to a stakeholder, the requirements differ quite a bit, right?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, what's great about where we kind of sit in the creative process is that, and where just AI generally sits today, is that we are the first place that people go.
Right.
We are where you go to start the project. And that is the best position to be in, because now the job is, how do we extend deeper and deeper into the later stages of the production process? Change is hard. Everybody falls at a different point along the adoption curve. You're going to have your early adopters, your early majority, late majority, laggards. Everyone kind of can self-identify probably into which category they fall. I'm glad that we're rolling this out sort of slowly in the world, in the sense that there is a lot to figure out here, a lot of unknowns, and I don't think the technology is ready yet, and I don't think people are ready yet to have a hard switch to some entirely new modality. And so the people that we're working with right now are, by definition, like, our customers are the early adopters. They're the people who are out at the forefront, and they see what's coming. They want to be part of it. I think there's tremendous economic and creative opportunity for the people who decide to do that. But I also don't think everybody should do that. I think it's okay to be skeptical. It's okay to be, I got my way of doing things. I'm going to continue to do that. It's working for me. But at the same time, like, we're seeing inroads. Like, we're seeing ways of talking about the product that gets people excited and doesn't feel necessarily like threatening to their identity. So instead of searching for stock photos, you can now just generate a photo that, and the experience is not all that different. Like, searching and prompting is a similar experience. And you're kind of replacing this, like, what for many feels like a non-creative task of browsing through a library of photos, trying to find the one that meets all your criteria, to something that feels very creative, where you can art direct and you can steer the model however you want. So I think there's these little inroads we're seeing, and we're finding our audience who's adopting these things early. But there's a lot of work to be done still around, okay, what is the interface? What are the buttons on this camera? What is the is the way of working with this technology? That
also, like, what are the concepts I find?
What are the concepts? What is the mental model? And by the way, these are all moving targets as the models are getting better. And I find that, like, we learned that the complicated interfaces usually are just because the models aren't good enough.
Right.
And once the models get good enough, the interfaces become very simple.
Yeah. That's got to be challenging because it's almost, you're making something that's going to be
100%.
obsolete. Or you're trying to at least disambiguate, like, what's the part that we know is obsolete versus the stuff that's load bearing.
Yeah.
That, like, when the model is improved dramatically, people will still want to think and operate this way and manipulate imagery this way.
And the good news for us, I think, is that because our customer is the professional designer, we get to we don't have to be on the frontier of every single new thing that comes out. If you're a professional designer who's trying to implement this in their work, you have a very different set of features that you care about. Team collaboration, quality of the image. So we get to be a little bit more...
It's a casino versus poker table, right?
Exactly. And so I think we get to be a little bit more selective about what we put in the product. We don't necessarily need to be first. We just want to be best.
Right.
Like we get to be the HBO of of the sort of AI design tool space. Quality over quantity.
Yeah.
So
and an HBO that's a great thing to aspire to.
Yeah.
And the cultural influence there is just resounding. What's been surprising to you about this role, in spite of the fact that you had all this scar tissue, all of this, like, these direct reps around this archetype? Like, once you are now in the pilot seat, what's kind of like startling or surprising or novel to you?
I mean, the most surprising thing is how my attachment to being the designer has not been very strong. Like, I was expecting the opposite.
Yeah.
I think what I've realized is, like, I think designers are often, being a designer is a big part of their identity.
Yeah.
And you know, it's not just a job. And I think for a while I thought I was a product designer, in the sense that, like, that was my identity.
Yeah.
That's who I was.
Who I am. Yeah.
And in the same way that I was a graphic designer before that. And I think what I've realized is that these are all just different flavors of a orientation to the world and a way of seeing things that is actually divorced from the specific task that I'm doing. And so really my job hasn't actually changed the way I see it. Like, I'm still a designer, if you want to call it that.
Yeah.
But I'm designing a company now.
It's like the materials have changed.
The materials have changed. And I think what I've realized is that the thing that got me into design in the first place is there's something deeper than just what it is that I'm actually making.
Yes.
There's a way of thinking.
Yes.
There's a way of problem solving, of tapping into just how do I bring something into existence. And in that sense, this is just the next sort of step for me in my career. And it's a privilege that I get to try to take on this bigger challenge of, you know, I'm not just designing a product, I'm designing an organization. I'm creating a culture, and these are design problems I haven't worked on before.
Right.
And that's very exciting to me. And I get to meet amazing people who are further along on this journey than I am.
Right.
And are able to help me and sort of give me the wisdom that they've learned. And so I don't see it as actually being a different job. I just see it as being applied to a different space.
I've said for years that I feel like sometimes designers are borderline cowardly when it comes to building new things and venturing into this unknown space, right? That there's almost like, I think the conventional wisdom is like, oh, the creative folks are inventive and they're crazy. They come up with all these new ideas. But I have found in practice, they tend to retreat from risk. They tend to want everything spelled out. They tend to want to delegate the problem selection.
I think it's the crafts person that's...
Right. Yeah. And so, like, when I hear craft, I was joking with Henry Modest about this recently. When we talk about craft and taste, I often feel like, oh, that's just like saying that you just want to make sure that they're playing in tune. That's just like baseline stuff. That's not like a differentiator, right? And so when people are kind of pontificating on craft and taste, I quickly start to get a little bit skeptical. Like, are we talking about something that's real here? Or because of course, your instruments should be in tune. That's just like baseline stuff. How do you sort of think about that vis-a-vis people who may have the aptitude to be great startup designers, but may not be sure about autonomy?
I agree with you that designers are uniquely positioned right now in 2025 to be great founders.
Yeah.
And I think it's because we're moving, like taste is the new skill.
Yeah.
With AI. I think AI is elevating everyone's ability to create. The differentiator is going to be who knows what great looks like. And so designers, I think, have a huge advantage here. I think maybe what people shy away from when you think about, I'm a designer, I don't want to be a founder. I don't want to be, doing one-on-ones. I don't want to be doing taxes.
Pitching VCs.
And like, for me personally, it's amazing what I'm motivated to do when it's in service of a larger mission and goal.
Right.
I've been every job of the company.
Yes.
At some point.
Yeah.
Including the office manager, the customer support person.
Yeah.
And at no point did it feel like I had to force myself to do that, because it was in service of this larger goal. And so for me, like, I get to design not just the product, but I get to design the experience of what it means to work at Visual Electric, what it means to be a customer of Visual Electric. And I don't know if enough designers have allowed themselves to think about or entertain the idea of what it would mean. And in the same way that I don't feel like I've lost my identity by becoming a founder, I think there is life after founding for designers.
Yeah.
You're not just becoming a suit or something after that. I think designing a company.
That's also a key insight too. There is life beyond being a founder. It's not like you're necessarily signing up for a 30-year endeavor.
Yeah.
Right. It's just a matter of like what your personal journey is.
And the privilege of being a founder is you get to design the job to perfectly suit you as a person.
Right.
And there's no one definition of what it means to be a CEO. Every CEO job is different. And you get to bring in people to take over the parts that are energy taking for you, and you get to focus on the parts that are energy giving for you. So that is the privilege of starting a company.
Yeah, I love it. Yeah. Like, for me, it's like in soccer, it's like the guy who asks for the ball.
100%.
I love that guy, and I love being that guy.
100%.
Because that's where the whole game flows. It's like you don't play better than the other players. You play like the ball. Do what the ball wants to do. And part of it's like the ball has to go to the right person.
So true. And I think if you know what you want in life and you ask for it, you're already in the top 1%.
Yeah, that's true.
And so many people don't have that clarity or the courage. And I think if there's anything that has helped me be successful, it is those two things.
Yeah. You're the guy, man.
I'm so glad we got that. Seriously, that's a way better idea.